Hello and welcome back to FT Business School. Forget balance sheets, financial analysis and the basics of marketing. One of the hottest new topics in business school these days is error management, how you deal with mistakes. Jan Hagen is a professor of leadership at ESMT, the European School of Management and Technology in Berlin, and a real expert on this subject. Professor Hagen, isn't the answer just to make fewer mistakes in the first place?
Well, that would be very nice. And for example, if we board airplanes, we expect that the pilots who fly these planes don't do mistakes. The reality is they very often do mistakes, not because they are dumb people or not trained well, but because we are humans, and as humans in complex systems, we tend to make mistakes.
But aren't we just all trained from a very early age to cover up mistakes, to avoid blame, to avoid being told off? I mean, isn't this just a wider social cultural problem?
Yeah, I think that the term that you already used is quite right. We associate errors with blaming, and in reality, what is the cause for errors is often that people are fatigued, that they are stressed, that they are distracted. And this is something that we have to realize. We shouldn't blame people for errors, but we should just take errors as facts and correct them as soon as possible.
Right. So how do you do that in a company? It's all about changing the culture of a company, isn't it?
I think it sounds easy. And when we talk about errors, we often associate it with the term we can learn from errors, which is true, but because all this cultural baggage that we carry, it's not that easy to do. And actually, when we interviewed executives, how they deal with errors in their own companies, it turns out that they have a clear preference for confidential conversations. The problem is, if you do it in these confidential settings, that the learning is just the two and not the company, and therefore it would be much better for companies to talk about errors in the open, but that's a big cultural challenge. And if you look, for example, in the aviation industry that has achieved that over time, that took them over 10 years to get to that process and lots of training. So it's not something that can be done overnight, even if you're well-intentioned.
In your book, you talk very succinctly about the aviation industry. I mean, what is it that they do that companies can learn?
Well, first of all, in aviation, they had a big paradigm shift. Like what I said, they moved away from the notion of error prevention and moved towards error management.
You have a background in the banking industry. I mean, could this sort of way of looking at things have prevented the 2008 banking crisis?
Well, I think it could have helped. I mean, what we saw is that in lots of cases, there were people in the banks aware of accumulating problems in structured products, for example, risk managers being aware of problems, being aware of liquidity problems, the kind of problems that we saw once Lehman collapsed. And the problem was they were not sufficiently able to communicate it up to the senior executives. I mean, in certain instances, I think people were also aware on the executive level, and they ignored it. So it's not that you can simply say, well, if they would have been trained in error management, the whole crisis could have been avoided. I think it's much more complex. But at least you would have the transparency within the systems, within the companies, about the problems. And I think that is what it's all about. I think like we still see airplanes coming down, we would also see problems in the corporate world coming. But it would be much easier to talk about problems early on and correct more cases than we see so far.
Professor Hagen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
To keep up to date with business school news and analysis, you can go to ft.com/business education.